Welcome to the channel, coin hunters, collectors, and history lovers. Today, we're turning our attention to one of the most recognizable and fascinating coins in American numismatic history, the Liberty Quarter dollar. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary piece of pocket change, but every Liberty Quarter carries a story shaped by American history, artistry, minting technology, and the collectors who continue searching for exceptional examples. In this video, we'll take a closer look at what makes these quarters interesting, from their dates and mint marks to their condition, striking details, varieties, and unusual errors. And most importantly, we'll explore why certain Liberty quarters can become far more desirable than their face value suggests. So before you spend that old quarter or place it back into a jar, take a closer look, because the smallest details can sometimes make the biggest difference. Stay with us as we examine the history, hidden characteristics, and collector appeal that make Liberty Quarter dollars. The 1989 Liberty Quarter dollar coin may look like an ordinary piece of pocket change, but before you toss one aside, take a closer look at what is actually in your hands. Struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1989, this Washington quarter belongs to a fascinating period in American coinage, when billions of familiar copper-nickel-clad quarters were being produced for everyday commerce. On the obverse, George Washington faces left beneath the inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust, while the reverse carries the familiar eagle design surrounded by United States of America, EPLURIBUS UNUM, quarter dollar, and the denomination. The tiny absence of a mint mark is important here because Philadelphia quarters of this era traditionally carried no mint letter, making the 1989 P designation, commonly used by collectors, somewhat different from coins bearing a visible P. That detail alone is a reminder that identifying a coin correctly requires more than simply reading the date. The real excitement begins when you start asking whether your particular 1989 quarter is completely normal, or whether something unusual happened to it during production. The first thing that makes this coin interesting is its condition. Most 1989 quarters spent years moving through cash registers, vending machines, pockets, purses, and bank rolls, collecting scratches, contact marks, dull surfaces, and discoloration along the way. A coin that somehow escaped that journey can look dramatically different. Examine Washington's cheek, hair, jawline, and the open fields surrounding the portrait, because these areas can reveal whether the coin has experienced heavy circulation or has preserved much of its original mint appearance. Then turn it over and study the eagle, especially the feather detail and the lettering around the rim. A sharply struck example with strong detail and minimal marks can attract considerably more attention than a heavily worn coin, although condition alone does not automatically make a 1989 quarter rare or valuable. Collectors also examine the edge for abnormalities, because the quarter's copper-nickel-clad construction normally produces a characteristic layered appearance rather than a solid silver-colored edge. If the color, edge, or surface looks dramatically different from what you expect, don't immediately assume you've discovered a fortune. First, consider whether the difference could have resulted from environmental damage, cleaning, plating, chemical exposure, or ordinary wear. Then comes the part that can turn a casual coin search into a genuine treasure hunt, looking for evidence of a mint-made error. On a 1989 quarter, collectors may pay attention to unusual doubling, off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, die cracks, missing or distorted design elements, and other production abnormalities. But this is where patience matters. Not every apparent doubled letter is a valuable doubled die, and machine doubling can create flat, shelf-like distortions that look exciting under a magnifying glass, but may carry little premium. Look carefully at the letters in Liberty, In God We Trust, and the inscriptions on the reverse, comparing suspicious features with a normal example rather than judging them from a photograph alone. Strike alignment is another useful checkpoint. Hold the coin carefully and compare the orientation of the obverse and reverse designs. Also inspect the rim all the way around for unusual thickness, weakness, flattening, or an irregular shape that could indicate a genuine striking problem. The key is to document what you see instead of trying to force every strange-looking mark into the category of a rare error. Now imagine finding a quarter that initially seems ordinary but reveals an unusual characteristic under careful examination. That is where the storytelling ladder begins, but it is important to keep expectations realistic. Depending on the exact error, rarity, condition, authenticity, and collector demand, an exceptional example could potentially enter completely different levels of interest. A minor variation or unusual characteristic might inspire a hypothetical market discussion around $2,500 to $3,500, while a significantly more dramatic and authenticated mint error could bring attention around $9,000 in an illustrative scenario. A high-grade example might be discussed around $5,000, while an unusual mint anomaly could be imagined around $6,000. Rare collector pieces might reach a hypothetical $7,500 level, and exceptionally preserved or uncommon examples could enter an $8,000 conversation. Particularly unusual discoveries with strong collector demand might be discussed around $8,500, while an extraordinary or historically significant specimen could approach $9,000 in this storytelling example. These numbers are illustrative only, never guaranteed prices, and should not be interpreted as a valuation of every 1989 quarter. Actual sales depend on the specific coin, certified grade, error type, eye appeal, provenance, and the market at the time of sale. And that is what makes the hunt so emotional. Imagine pulling a quarter from an old jar, a forgotten drawer, a childhood collection, or a box of coins that has been sitting untouched for decades, only to notice something that doesn't look quite right. Suddenly, that ordinary piece of change feels different. At the highest hypothetical levels, a qualifying rare coin could represent something as meaningful as a down payment on a home, a sudden windfall, or the kind of once-in-a-lifetime discovery collectors dream about for years. But the real thrill isn't simply seeing a large number attached to a coin. It is the possibility that an object everyone else ignored may contain a story written into its metal by the minting process itself. Perhaps the coin was struck slightly off-center, perhaps a die developed an unusual crack, perhaps a planchet problem created a dramatic shape, or perhaps the apparent rarity disappears once a professional examines it. The difference between an exciting curiosity and a truly valuable error can be incredibly small, which is why careful observation matters more than excitement. Before you start celebrating, put the coin through a responsible examination. Use a precise digital scale and compare the weight with the standard specification for a normal 1989 quarter, but remember that circulation wear and measurement tolerance can affect the result. Inspect the metal color under neutral lighting and pay particular attention to the edge, because a strange appearance can sometimes indicate environmental alteration rather than a mint error. Check the rim for consistent thickness and look for genuine irregularities rather than damage caused by machines, impacts, or other coins. Examine the strike alignment by carefully rotating the coin and comparing the orientation of both sides. Use magnification to inspect lettering for possible doubling, but don't clean, polish, scrape, or chemically treat the coin in an attempt to make an error easier to see. Cleaning can permanently damage collector value and destroy important surface evidence. If something truly unusual remains after your inspection, preserve the coin in its existing condition and seek an experienced numismatist or reputable third-party grading and authentication service. Professional authentication can determine whether an apparent error is actually mint-made and can provide an independent assessment of condition and rarity. There is another reason the 1989 quarter deserves attention. Ordinary coins can survive for decades without anyone recognizing their unusual characteristics. A coin can travel through countless hands, disappear into a dresser drawer, sit inside an inherited collection, or remain buried beneath a pile of modern change before finally landing in the hands of someone who knows what to look for. That possibility is what keeps collectors searching. You don't need to own a treasure chest filled with ancient coins to participate in the hunt. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries begin with a single familiar quarter and a few minutes of careful inspection. Just remember that most 1989 quarters are common circulating coins, and dramatic valuations require genuinely rare characteristics supported by evidence and, ideally, professional certification. The goal isn't to turn every ordinary mark into a fortune. The goal is to learn how to recognize the difference between normal wear, post-mint damage, minor variation, and a legitimate mint-made rarity. Once you develop that eye, even a simple quarter can become a lesson in American manufacturing, history, and collecting. So the next time a 1989 quarter appears in your change, don't automatically drop it into the nearest pile. Turn it over. Study Washington's portrait, inspect the lettering, follow the rim, examine the edge, check the color, compare the alignment, and look for anything genuinely different from a normal example. Most coins will reveal nothing extraordinary, and that's perfectly normal. But every careful examination teaches you something that could make the next discovery more exciting. Somewhere among ordinary coins, unusual pieces can remain hidden for years, waiting for someone patient enough to notice the details everyone else overlooked. And if you think this 1989 quarter has already shown you everything a familiar coin can hide, wait until you see what can happen with another seemingly ordinary American coin. The next one may have a detail so unexpected that it could completely change the way you look at your own pocket change. The 1965 Liberty quarter-dollar coin begins a fascinating chapter in American coinage, because it belongs to the first year of a major transformation in the nation's circulating quarters, and that alone makes an ordinary-looking example worth a closer look. At first glance, you see the familiar profile of Liberty on the obverse, surrounded by United States of America and the denomination quarter dollar, while the reverse presents the powerful eagle design that had appeared on Washington quarters since 1932. But 1965 is not simply another date on a quarter. It marks the beginning of the copper-nickel-clad era after the United States moved away from the traditional silver composition for circulating quarters. That change was driven by rising silver prices and coin shortages, creating a historic dividing line that collectors can actually hold in their hands. So if you have a 1965 quarter sitting in an old jar, drawer, inherited collection, or forgotten box of change, don't dismiss it simply because millions were made. The real mystery begins when you ask whether your particular coin has something unusual hiding beneath its familiar appearance. Turn that 1965 quarter under a strong light, and the first thing to notice is its overall color and surface character. A normal clad quarter should show the appearance expected from its copper-nickel outer layers and copper core, while the edge can provide especially useful clues because the layered construction may be visible along the rim. This is where a simple pocket coin can suddenly become an investigation. Look carefully at the date, the lettering, the rim, the eagle, and the spaces between major design elements. You're not looking for scratches that merely happened after the coin left the mint. You're looking for evidence that something unusual may have happened during production. A weak area can come from striking pressure. A distorted rim can suggest a minting problem. An apparent doubling may deserve closer inspection. But not every strange-looking mark is a valuable error. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes collectors make is confusing damage with a genuine mint-made variety. The more carefully you examine the coin, the more important the distinction becomes, because the story of a valuable 1965 quarter is not simply that it looks old or different. It is that the unusual feature can be connected convincingly to the manufacturing process. And this is where the 1965 quarter becomes especially intriguing, because transitional periods can create extraordinary collector interest. The United States was moving from silver coinage to clad coinage, and the early years of that transition naturally invite collectors to examine composition, striking characteristics, and possible anomalies with unusual attention. If your coin appears dramatically different from a normal 1965 quarter, don't immediately assume you've discovered a fortune. Instead, weigh it with a precise digital scale, preferably one capable of measuring to at least 1/10 of a gram, and compare the result with reliable specifications for the standard coin. Then inspect the edge for unusual color or layering. Check whether the strike appears properly centered, study the rim for irregular expansion or distortion, and examine the lettering under magnification for credible doubling. A major difference in weight or appearance can be interesting, but it can also result from environmental damage, alteration, plating, or other postment activity. That is why responsible collecting means preserving the coin exactly as found rather than cleaning, polishing, scraping, or chemically testing it. Sometimes the urge to make a discovery look better can destroy the very evidence needed to prove what it is. Now imagine the moment when someone pulls a forgotten 1965 quarter from an inherited collection and notices that it doesn't quite match the others. Maybe the edge looks unusual. Maybe the strike seems dramatically off-center. Maybe a letter appears to carry a secondary image that survives close examination. Suddenly, the coin is no longer just 25 cents in your mind. It becomes a question. Could this be a genuine mint error? Could its condition be unusually strong for the date? Could collectors actually compete for it? Those questions lead us into the value discussion, but this is where we need to separate excitement from certainty. Illustratively, a minor but interesting variation might be imagined in a $2,500 to $3,500 storytelling range if it were independently verified, while a more notable and desirable example could be discussed around $9,000 in an exceptional hypothetical outcome. A high-grade example might be placed around $5,000 in this illustrative ladder, while an unusual mint anomaly could reach a hypothetical $6,000 scenario. These figures are not promises, price guides, or guaranteed values. Actual prices depend on authentication, grade, rarity, demand, provenance, and the specific characteristics of the coin. The latter can climb further when several desirable factors come together. A rare collector piece might be imagined around $7,500, while an exceptionally preserved or genuinely uncommon example could enter an illustrative $8,000 scenario. An unusual discovery with strong collector demand might be discussed around $8,500, and an extraordinary or historically significant example could be placed as high as $9,000 within this storytelling framework. Again, these numbers are illustrative only and should never be mistaken for guaranteed market prices for an ordinary 1965 quarter. In the real collecting world, two coins with the same date can have dramatically different values because one may be worn while another retains remarkable detail, or because one has a documented mint error while the other only has damage that happened decades later. For the person who discovers a truly important coin, however, the emotional impact can feel enormous. A legitimate high-value discovery could resemble a sudden windfall, something that unexpectedly changes the possibilities of a difficult month. Or even, in an extraordinary case, the kind of money someone might imagine putting toward a down payment on a home. But before dreaming about that outcome, the evidence has to come first. So here's how to approach your own 1965 quarter without falling into the trap of internet hype. Start with the date and identify exactly what you have. Examine the obverse and reverse under magnification, looking for genuine doubling rather than flat, scraped, or damaged lettering. Study the strike alignment by checking how the major designs and rims relate to one another, and inspect the rim for abnormal shape, missing metal, or other features that appear consistent with a minting event. Pay close attention to the edge and metal color, because a coin that looks dramatically different can be interesting, but appearance alone cannot establish composition. Most importantly, use a calibrated scale and compare the weight with authoritative specifications rather than trusting a kitchen scale or a photograph. Never clean the coin, never scratch it to test the metal, and never rely solely on a social media comment claiming you found a rare treasure. If the evidence suggests something genuinely unusual, professional authentication and certification can make the difference between an exciting story and a defensible collectible. The goal isn't simply to believe the coin is rare. The goal is to establish why it is rare. And perhaps that's the most fascinating thing about a 1965 Liberty $quarter coin. Its greatest secret may not be visible until you stop treating it like ordinary pocket change. This was a pivotal year in American coinage, a moment when the nation's circulating quarter entered a new era, and millions of examples traveled through countless hands afterward. Most are exactly what they appear to be, common coins with historical importance rather than extraordinary monetary value. Yet the possibility of a genuine mint-made anomaly, an exceptional state of preservation, or an unusual documented example is what keeps collectors searching. Somewhere, perhaps in an old family album, a dusty coin jar, a bank roll, or a box that hasn't been opened for decades, a coin may be waiting for someone patient enough to notice the details. And that's the suspense every collector understands. You can examine 100 ordinary coins before the 101st makes you stop breathing for a second. So before you spend that next 1965 quarter without looking twice, remember that the smallest clues can lead to the biggest questions. And if you think this coin is surprising, wait until you see the next one, because the next discovery may be the kind that makes even experienced collectors look twice. The 1985 Liberty $quarter coin may look like an ordinary piece of pocket change, but this Philadelphia minted quarter carries a story that begins in the final decades of the classic Washington quarter era, when millions of these coins were being produced for everyday American commerce. Dated 1985 and bearing the small P mint mark, identifying the Philadelphia Mint. It was struck during a period when the familiar copper-nickel-clad quarter had already become a routine part of American life. On the obverse, George Washington faces left beneath the inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust, while the reverse displays the familiar eagle design surrounded by United States of America, EPLURIBUSUNUM, and the denomination quarter dollar. At first glance, there is nothing dramatic about it, and that is precisely what makes the search fascinating. Millions were made, so an ordinary circulated 1985 quarter is generally not rare or exceptionally valuable. But collectors know that production at this scale creates opportunities for unusual strikes, die varieties, condition rarities, and genuine mint errors. And sometimes the difference between an ordinary coin and a remarkable one is hiding in a detail so small that you could miss it without knowing exactly where to look. The first thing to understand about the 1985 quarter is its physical identity. Unlike the wartime silver quarters of an earlier generation, this coin uses the standard copper-nickel-clad construction adopted for U.S. quarters beginning in 1965, with a copper core surrounded by outer layers of copper-nickel alloy. That means the coin should have the familiar silvery appearance from the face and edge, while a normal exposed edge can reveal a thin copper-colored line between the outer layers. That copper-colored stripe is not automatically an error. It is a normal feature of clad coinage. The coin should also have the expected weight and dimensions for its type, and those measurements provide one of the most useful first clues when examining a suspicious example. A meaningful weight difference can sometimes point toward a planchet problem, missing material, or another manufacturing anomaly, But a small difference can also result from ordinary wear, dirt, or measurement tolerances. This is where responsible collecting matters. Instead of immediately assuming that an unusual-looking quarter is a jackpot, compare it with a normal 1985p example, examine it under good lighting, and record what you actually see. The goal is not to manufacture a rare story around an ordinary coin, but to recognize when the evidence genuinely suggests something unusual. Then comes the moment that can make a routine coin search suddenly feel like a treasure hunt: the examination of the strike. Look closely at Washington's portrait, the lettering, the date, the rim, and the areas where the design meets the edge. A weak strike can make letters or details appear strangely incomplete, but weak detail is not automatically a valuable error. A genuine mint-made anomaly can involve unusual doubling, an off-center strike, a broad strike, a clipped planchet, a dramatic die problem, or another documented production mistake. Letter doubling deserves especially careful attention because machine doubling, die deterioration, circulation damage, and lighting can create appearances that resemble valuable doubled dies. Tilt the coin, rotate it slowly, and compare the shape and separation of the letters rather than relying on a single photograph. Pay particular attention to the date and mint mark, because those areas can reveal details worth investigating further. The rim is another important clue. A normal rim should have a consistent relationship with the design, while a dramatic deformation around one portion of the circumference could warrant closer examination. But remember, damage caused after the coin left the mint can look spectacular while adding little or no collector premium. Now imagine finding a 1985p quarter that appears different enough to stop you in your tracks. Maybe the edge looks unusual, perhaps the strike seems dramatically shifted, or the lettering appears to show a genuine mint-created anomaly. This is where the emotional side of collecting begins. A person can spend years passing coins from one hand to another without ever looking closely, and then one ordinary afternoon, a single quarter can trigger the question every collector loves to ask: what if? That question can be exciting, but it needs to be balanced with evidence. The vast majority of 1985p quarters will not be worth thousands of dollars, and an online claim about a huge price does not prove that a particular coin has the same characteristics. Condition matters enormously, especially because high-grade examples with sharp details, strong luster, and minimal marks can attract specialists. A coin that spent decades rattling around in cash registers will usually tell a very different story from one that was carefully preserved soon after minting. That contrast is part of the collector appeal. The possibility that two coins carrying exactly the same date and mint mark can have dramatically different stories because of what happened to them after they were struck. And now we reach the value ladder, where imagination has to meet reality. For storytelling purposes, illustrative outcomes might begin around $2,500 to $3,500 for a coin displaying a genuinely interesting and desirable minor variation, while a more notable and well-documented example could be discussed around $9,000. A high-grade coin might be imagined around $5,000, an unusual mint anomaly around $6,000, and a rare collector piece around $7,500. An exceptionally preserved or uncommon example could enter an illustrative $8,000 range, while an unusual discovery with strong collector demand might reach a hypothetical $8,500 level, with extraordinary or historically significant examples represented in the story at up to $9,000. But these figures are illustrative storytelling amounts, never guaranteed values, and they should not be mistaken for standard prices for an ordinary 1985p quarter. Actual market value depends on the exact variety or error, authenticity, grade, eye appeal, provenance, and what knowledgeable buyers are willing to pay at a particular time. In the right circumstances, a dramatic discovery could feel like a sudden windfall, perhaps even resembling the kind of money someone might put toward a down payment on a home. But the responsible collector never starts with the price tag. The collector starts with the evidence. So how do you investigate one responsibly? Begin with a clean workspace and strong, neutral lighting, and avoid harsh cleaning or polishing, because altering the surface can destroy originality and reduce collector interest. Check the weight with a reliable digital scale and compare it with the normal specifications for a 1985 quarter. Examine the metal color along the edge and look for anything genuinely inconsistent with normal clad construction. Inspect the strike alignment from both sides and study whether the designs appear properly centered relative to the rim. Use magnification to examine the date, Liberty, In God We Trust, and other lettering for true separation or doubling. But do not assume every shadow or raised ridge is a doubled die. Look for rim abnormalities and signs that could indicate a planchet or striking problem, while also checking for scratches, gouges, environmental damage, or alterations that happened after minting. If something truly unusual survives these basic checks, photograph it from multiple angles and seek an experienced numismatist or reputable grading and authentication service. Professional authentication is especially important before assigning a major value to an alleged error, because the difference between a genuine mint error and post-mint damage can be worth far more than the coin itself. The most compelling part of the 1985 quarter story is not that every example is secretly worth thousands. It is that an ordinary-looking coin can teach you how extraordinary the smallest details can become. Think about the journey of one quarter, struck at the Philadelphia Mint, released into commerce, passed through countless hands, perhaps forgotten in a jar, drawer, cash register, or old collection, and eventually discovered by someone who decided to look closer. That is why condition, originality, rarity, and documented mint characteristics matter so much. A coin with a genuine anomaly can attract collectors because it represents a specific moment when the normal manufacturing process produced something unexpected. And if you happen to find an exceptionally sharp example, a remarkable error, or a rare variety, the excitement can be very real. But the strongest discoveries are supported by careful measurements, clear photographs, comparison with known examples, and professional confirmation. The dream of a once-in-a-lifetime discovery is what gets people searching, but disciplined examination is what separates a fascinating possibility from a genuine numismatic treasure. So the next time a 1985 quarter appears in your change, don't automatically toss it aside just because millions were made. Hold it under the light and let the details tell you their story. Check the date, confirm the P, study Washington's portrait, inspect the reverse, examine the rim, look at the edge, consider the weight, and carefully investigate any apparent doubling or unusual strike characteristics. Most will simply be normal quarters, and that is perfectly fine. But every collector understands the strange thrill of knowing that the next handful of coins could contain something you have never noticed before. Somewhere, an overlooked piece of American history may still be sitting quietly in an old jar, a forgotten drawer, a box of inherited change, or the bottom of a pocket. And if the 1985 taught us anything, it is that the most ordinary-looking coin can sometimes be the beginning of an extraordinary search. But don't stop looking now, because the next coin we uncover may have an even stranger story, a far more elusive minting mystery, and a detail so shocking that once you see it, you may never look at your pocket change the same way again.